Hello, and welcome to another of the Zulu's Painting Show. Now, last week I finished up the orc on the dire wolf, and I talked about moving into doing some batch painting. And I was, oddly enough, doing some testing beforehand, trying to figure out the color scheme I wanted to do, so I could go into this with a little bit more of the techniques of the painting rather than me muddling around trying to figure out what I want to do. And while doing that, I discovered that I have quite a bit of reliance on a thing called contrast paint. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be having a little bit of a look at contrast paints, how they work, and what they can be used for. So for that example, let's go ahead and switch over to the top down. Ooh, let's get that logo out of the way so we can see the whole thing. Actually, honestly, that logo there isn't bad. As always, I am prepared 100% for what's about to happen. So, let's have a look at what we're working with. So we have two identical models. We've got this horse here who has not yet been painted, and then we've got this guy who has been. He's been painted with almost exclusively contrast paints. And so we're gonna kind of show you how to use those. Now the reason for that is because, and you can definitely see it in the background here, there is this Epic Encounters box. Go ahead and bring that up just a little bit. This is the Goblin Village. Inside it there are 20 models, including these little guys, who I have gotten started on. I'll go ahead and bring the focus in so we can get a good look at these guys. They're delightfully detailed. If we're looking at these guys, let's see. Oh no, I just don't have enough light. Sorry, just dealing with some technical issues. So they've got a lot of fun detail on them. And if you'll notice, there's a lot of sort of blacks and whites. That's not just because my lighting is borked. It's actually because I have done what's called a zenithal priming, which we'll get more into next week when we get into the batch painting. But suffice it to say, it makes the whole process a lot faster and a lot easier. I think I realized my trouble. My top light is a little too far forward. Let me just bring this back a little. There we go. Now the light's directly over. Is that any better? Yeah, I can see the greens on him. So we'll be getting into how I achieved this, and kind of where to go from here. But before we can do that, we need to understand how I got to this point, which was using contrast paints. Now contrast paints, and as an example, this is what the goblins will eventually all look like. Well, similar to him. So, contrast paints are a paint created by Citidel. Now we are wandering a little bit away from our army painter paints, but that's okay. There's a variety of different sort of products and things that you can use in your painting, and I will be doing as much as I can to incorporate that starter box into what we're doing. I'll also next week have a link for the Epic Encounter box, so you can see a little bit more of that on our website. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and refocus a little bit to our sort of working location. There we go. Because I don't want both of my horses to look identical, we're going to be playing a little bit around with some different colors, but the concepts will be similar, and you'll still be able to get to the same place with them. Also, for most of this, we're going to be using our monster brush. Let's see if I can. There we go. So yeah, we'll be diving in with the monster brush. We'll be getting that guy started. Much like the wash, A lot of times with these, I will pull directly from the pot. We're going to be mixing some of our own contrast for the saddle. Because of the colors that I have, I don't have the quite right color. So we have this technical contrast medium. We'll be using that to get our saddle brown. So let's go ahead and just dive right into it. Now for this one, I used this what was that? Sigor, Krager. This brown for the body. And then our skeleton horde for the mane. We're going to reverse that for our guy here. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Also, I was very excited. The router is no longer where I'm streaming, so I could turn down the volume a little bit of the fan to keep it cool. But now you can hear the sound of the computer trying desperately to keep itself cool. This room isn't particularly hot, but apparently it is just more than the computer can handle. So we've got our horse. Let's go ahead and just dive right into it. Now again, we're starting with this, with the fur of the horse, because firstly it is the bottommost part, and secondly it's the lighter color. So if we get some stuff in the other places, then that's okay. So, as you can see, contrast paints are a little thinner than your sort of layers or your or the paints we've been working with. More similar to a wash in many ways, but it doesn't operate exactly the same in that it won't fill the recesses in the same way. It still will tend to fill the recesses, but if you'll notice, like here, it's... Oh, I need to get closer to the camera, sorry about that. It's staying a lot more sort of on the surface of the model. So for now, we're just going to get a nice even coat of our skeleton horde all over the model, so we can kind of have our starting spot. And this one has a nice long working time, so you can really just sort of move it around. Now, it does tend to pool a little bit. You can see it's pooling right here. So you got to make sure to go back over the parts that you've done. Make sure that you're not letting any of the contrast sit on there too thick. And we're going to definitely want to wash this afterwards. Not with soap, mind you, with a nice wash. Yeah, much like with the dire wolf, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to get complete coverage of this first color, and then we'll dive into the other colors as we keep going. Now also to distinguish these two horses from each other a little bit nicer, we're going to be making the blanket, probably this here, nice bright red, give a nice pop of color, and then the blanket we'll probably do as maybe a blue, something to add a little bit more contrast to it. I gotta make sure my focus is where I'm working. Oh, that's better. Sorry about that focus problem. Ironically, I get focused on painting and forget to check the focus for you guys. I really enjoy this as a color. It's just a nice sort of nutty color. You can use it for like a light wood. You can use it for like this, for like the fur. Yeah, we got a little bit of pooling here, but I don't think that's going to be too bad. Oh, I'm poking it too much, and that's causing it to get a little grumpy. It's just with things like this, you got to remember to really check all the different angles. The legs will sometimes have spots that are only really able to see at certain angles, but if you get to that angle, it's really obvious that you've left out a spot. So you got to make sure you get your full coverage on your horse. And see, just in a matter of a couple moments, we've already gotten a nice layer of paint on there. And he's got a good starting color. That's why I like paints like this. I like washes and contrasts and things, because you can really knock out a lot of stuff with a relative ease. Now it's very important because for batch painting, you're going to want to be able to do them relatively quickly. Like I said, this box here has 20 models in it, and I don't want to be spending all my time painstakingly doing each individual one. Now this little guy here, the chieftain, I did spend the time to really let him be the focus, but he's a hero. You gotta give him the sort of proper time and love that he deserves. Now, like I said, kind of a longer working time. This guy's going to be drying a little bit. And I figure while we're letting this guy dry, I can take a quick moment to talk a little bit about the zenithal priming. So these guys are sort of our end goal. We're going to be coming to them. I'm going to be showing you how I got to that point. But in order to get to there, I needed to discuss contrasts and how they work. But even before that as well, I need to make a quick discussion about zenithal priming. So, this is one of the models that comes in the box. He is a snail covered in wood. And, I'm going to put this brush down. His shell seems to look like it's made of wood. He's got moss growing on his back, and he's got a bunch of rocks that he intends to throw. Now, if you'll notice, his shadow is much more stark. I don't have any completely white. Oh, here we go. Here's another model waiting for paint. So this guy is just white. And if you'll notice, there's a lot darker stuff on this one, and that's because what I did was I primed this model completely black. I then took the primer, the white primer, I pointed it down from the top and I sprayed. So if you'll notice, if you look directly from the top of him, he looks pretty white. Whereas if you look at him from the sort of bottom angles, he has a much darker look to him. This creates a lot of your sort of shadows in the model just before you even start. Now you might end up completely covering your prime, but it also helps for things like contrast paints that are somewhat thinner. So you can really show off those sort of variations in shadow, recess versus the sort of upper parts. So I'm going to turn this up just a little. So, now I'm sorry, I'm adjusting. I'm making sure my volume isn't too far down. All right, especially because I'm not looking at my mic to talk to you. Ooh. So maybe not hit the mic, that'll be helpful. What that means is, so these guys were primed the exact same way. So I put this green contrast on there, and because of that, oh, he's very dark in this shot. Because of that, they have a lot more sort of depth to them, which is just helpful. And if nothing else, like even if you do end up covering all the details, covering all the spots with less opaque things, it's nice to just be able to see the details on the model and kind of what things are supposed to be. So that's that. Now we've given this guy a little bit of time to dry. Looks like it has pretty good coverage. We don't really want to get a lot of the edges. So let's go ahead and dive into this here blanket. You want to do blanket time? Yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the blanket. Oh. Try to stop knocking the camera around. Let's make a nice bold red for the blanket. Now with these ones, because they are kind of a thinner paint, it's a pigment and a contrast in the same bottle. You really want to make sure that you get a good shake on these guys, so you don't your paint isn't separated. I've actually put a couple agitators in these because, for instance, this one you can see has very much separated. So I put some agitators in there, and that was simply an extra pewter head for a model that I ended up not using. I had an extra thing on there, so I just threw that in. Alright, ooh, I like this red because it's a very bold, very exciting to look at color. Get a nice pop of color to it, and it'll be a fun sort of contrast to the much lighter color of the horse. Now here we're going to need to be a little bit more careful, because as you can see already, this color is intense. So let's go ahead and be a little bit more careful. Just that way we don't have to worry as much about getting good coverage on the saddle. And I think I mentioned this before, but one of the ways I like to do this is you just place your brush sort of on the surface and then push it up into the corners. That way you're not going to get too much on there. And if you find that you've got a little bit of pooled paint, go ahead and just pick it up off the spots that it's a little thicker, and you can kind of redistribute it there. I've talked about this before, but the whole thing that's happening with your brush is you're using capillary action. So sort of the gap between the hairs of your brush is what's collecting up the paint. So the more full your brush is, the less paint that you can collect up off other things. But as you've pushed the paint onto other parts, you've sort of opened your brush up to be able to hold more. I got a little bit of red there. That's okay. We'll come through and do some touch-ups. Now what's going to be interesting is because of the sort of opacity of our contrasts, we won't really be able to use the contrast to touch things up. We'll have to switch to our paints to be able to do that. And by paints I mean our starter kit paints. Don't worry, we haven't forgot about those guys. We're going to come back to them. I'm already digging I'm already digging this color. What I was going to say was there is a nice sort of line along the bottom of this blanket. And while the contrast paints don't sort of pool the same way that like a wash would, they do pool enough that they will really bring out the detail of that guy there. See, now that I'm doing this, I'm noticing the spots that I really should have cleaned up on the model before I got started, but we haven't got to cleaning models yet, so. Plus, I'm really not sure how much this guy will actually get used. Now, because there is a little extra there in that corner, I really don't want to mix my colors. What I've done is I've cleaned off my brush. I'm just going to go in, give it a quick stroke to get all the excess off so that it can start drying. It's when you have too much paint pooled in an area that it takes that much longer to dry. So we're just going to clean that up a little bit, and while we're at it, I'm just going to clean that a little. Alright, so we're just about done with the saddle, but while we let that dry, we're going to go ahead and dive into doing the mane and tail real quick. So we're not quite ready to do. I'm not quite ready to do some of the details. So let's go ahead and grab that. Let's see. Ah, yes. We're going back to our brown, our darker brown. I'm going to do that for the mane and tail. Now is definitely going to have to be a little bit more careful because it's going to be a little harder to clean this up. And it is always good to remember that this is a somewhat thinner paint, so it will move a little bit more erratically than you might be expecting. So you gotta get ready for that. Always just be mindful of the difference in the material that you're working with and how it will react slightly differently. Oh, I'm silly. I'm sitting here holding this very thin model's base, and I remembered I've got a big stand. I do also have a bit of glue tack and another paint pot. If I wanted to use that, I could, but I have this nice little handhold, so I'm going to use that. It's just nice to have a little something extra to hold on to, so you're not kind of gripping the plastic, very thin plastic. And we're going to be going over the leathers with one of our starting paints, but because this is such a dark color, I don't really want to go too nuts getting on the other stuff. So I'm just going to try and play it safe, take my time, especially because we're only we're only a little ways into this, and I've already managed to get this guy darn near done. And as you can see, as this is drying, it is starting to pool a little bit, not as much as a wash, but it is beginning to pool somewhat. So it is bringing out sort of the detail of the hair, which is very nice. Oh, I've also darkened, in an attempt to make the whites not too white, I've darkened my camera too much. So let's go ahead and lighten that just a little bit. There you go. I think for the body I'm still going to go over it with a wash, just because I want to really bring out the muscles of the horse. Just to really bring that detail out. Now let's go ahead and get the top of his head. Yeah, I'm liking how this guy's turning out. And as you've seen, this process is pretty quick. Oh, I just realized I didn't do his ear with the other. So I'm gonna need to go back through with my lighter brown and get his ears. That'll be fine for now. All right. Get into this tail. Since we're not like this big surface, we can really just start slapping on. Oh, in case you were wondering about the Ogre Paint Night tonight, due to some scheduling conflicts, we had to postpone that until next week. So if you hadn't had a chance to grab your zombie ogre yet, and you weren't prepared for whatever reason, not all is lost. You can still get be a part of that. So that will be Ethan, which if any of you have been to the store and participated in one of our other painting events, you'll have worked with Ethan before. He did the owlbear painting event, which was a lot of fun. He's done a manticore painting event, and then now we're doing an ogre zombie. And we went over a little bit more details of that in some of the Zulu's shopping network. We're shopping the name right now. I'm to the very fun part of trying to get this between this horse's legs. It's not a great angle either to see or to paint. Alright, feeling pretty good about that tail. Now we've still got a little bit of the red that I want to clean up now that the stuff is dried. I might do a little bit more here because it looks like we've got a little bit more white showing through than I'd like. Oh, we also got some spots though underneath. Go ahead and clean out the brush. It's getting a little gummy. Oh, I've turned off my light with my shoulder. It's gotten very dark. There it is. It's back. Oh. Trying to adjust it so I can sit in a little bit better angle. Sort of hunched around it. Alright. Let's get a little bit more. So it's got a little bit of hair just peeking out the bottom here. So grab that just to make sure that I don't forget it later. Grab that there. It's got a bit more peeking out on this side. When doing stuff like, oh goodness, we got the saddle. That's okay. We'll clean that up. So with these hairs here, I find that the easiest way to get to places like that is to sort of follow the movement of the hair with sort of downward strokes through it. Alright, let's go ahead and finish up the red. Feeling pretty good about the mane there. I got a couple spots I need to come back through. Oh. A couple spots I got to come back through and grab for like the ears. One of the things that I'll run into sometimes is if I clean my brush off, I'll want to kind of, not go back to that color. Now that's sort of what you end up doing with batch painting. A lot of time with batch painting, when you're working a single color, that's sort of the color that's the color you're working with. But on occasion, you'll need to kind of go back, hit a color that you may have missed for little details and things, and that's not bad, It's just part of the painting process. But at the same time, much like we were when we were cleaning things up, it's sometimes good to go ahead and finish the color you're working with before you start going back to touch things up, because you're gonna possibly get make other foibles, and you'll need to come back and be able to clean those up. Flubs, that was the word. Foibles are different things. Flubs are where you miss with your paint just a little bit and get something you don't necessarily intend to. There we go. Now with this blanket, there is definitely a thickness to it, so you got to remember to get, just because you're doing the front face of it, you got to remember to do the sides as well. Oh, it's a big old streak of red there. We're going to come back and fix that. All right. There's our blanket, our mane, and our main horse color done. I'm gonna. What am I gonna do next? I feel like I should clean up the fur and hit that with a wash. No, but I got some other spots that I'm going to hit probably as well. So let's go ahead and return to the fur last. For if I mess up any other spots. Oh, his ears. That's what I was going to do. I was like, I knew I needed to come back to the fur for some reason. So yeah, we'll come back to the fur in earnest once we've finished up some of the rest of the stuff. But for now, like I was saying, there's no reason to get too ahead of ourselves. Let's go ahead and just take some time to finish up the other colors. There's a lot of places where those colors are touching the fur, so if we need to come back and fix those, we'll do them all at once. Where did I put... Oh, right, I'm doing this. I also need to remember where I put... Oh, there they are. I forgot for a moment where I put the starter paints. They've hidden away from me, but we'll be able to grab them in a moment. So here is our brown. Go ahead and get the tops of those ears that I missed somehow completely. Also, I seem to have, I think I may have scraped a little on the chest. So I'm going to go ahead and just clean that back up. One of the things that I was thinking could be a lot of fun is I know that we've been having a lot of people getting BattleTech miniatures recently, and I'm a big fan of BattleTech, and especially with these contrasts, you can do some really nice batch painting with those guys. So we might go over some of that. If there's interest, you know, feel free to let me know. Drop a comment in this video. Get the word out if that's something you're interested in. Alright. Now, like I said, for the saddle, I wanna play around a little bit with some of our other. So we have some contrast medium, and of course our starter paints that we've used before. So I'm gonna grab those. And I'm back. My pile of paints. Let's see. For the saddle, I think we may just go with our leather brown. I mean, it's leather. Why not? So I'm going to grab our contrast medium, give it a quick shake. I'm going to perform very carefully. I'm going to get myself just a little bit of this medium. This unfortunately is not in a easy to use container. What you can't see just off screen, I am in careful concentration, trying desperately not to make a giant mess. Let's do just a little bit more. Alright, so we have, it's kind of hard to see because it's white on white. It's also a little bit off of where we're working. But I've got a small pool of the contrast medium. I would say, what would that be? Just a small bit. So I wonder if I hold it up to the camera, if I'm going to dribble this all over everything. If you can see, again, it's that white on white. It's just, yeah, you can't see that. As I get the brown in there, it'll be a little easier to see. So I'm going to put a couple. Let's put 2 drops of brown in. Well, the brown does not drop very well. Oh, and then so it's a kind of a 2-to-1 ratio on our medium to ink. Oh, that's not a bad consistency. My concern is that it's too close of a color to our horse, but that's okay. I think it'll still be fine. What's nice about using the contrast for this and this pigment is when we want to do some of the higher detail things like the bridle and the reins, we'll be able to use the same brown. It should cooperate with us. So, all right, let's see how this goes. Oh, that is a different enough brown. Oh, good. Yeah, my concern was that it would look too similar to the horse, but this has more of like a chocolate milk sort of brown, whereas the horse has much more of let's say almost like a walnut sort of brown. Oh yeah, that was a really good ratio. I kind of like how that turned out. So you can see a little bit, or hopefully on the palette, my amount. So essentially, I just filled one of the sort of depressions, and it's a sort of a 2-to-1 ratio on that. And it's a nice sort of light brown. We're still going to wash this because it's a little lighter than I'd like, but it's not too light, which is nice. I think the wash will help really bring out some of the color, at least some of the details. Plus, if we have some time at the end of this episode, which it looks like we might, I can talk a little bit about highlighting, which I think would be very nice, because I meant to do that on our orc on the dire wolf, but we ended up running out of time for him. Not that we couldn't have gone back. I largely get to control the schedule here, but here's the fun. So we've got this here, this spot here that is a bit darker because I sort of went over. So what I'll do there is, once this is dried, I'll actually hit that with a little white and then go back over it with our contrast that we've mixed. And that should give us the colors we're desiring. Yeah. With things like this, when you're working with much more opaque paints, you do want to essentially get your the spot that you're fixing back to the undercoat's color, which in this case is white. And then once you have it back to that undercoat color, then you can go back over it with your contrast, and it will look the way you want it. Or it should look the way you want it. And we're going to be doing a little bit, we're going to be putting some metal here, so I'll clean that up. We're also going to end up doing some black on the inside of there, just to make it, to give that illusion of depth, because they didn't want to do the flatness, or like they didn't want it to be hollow, because then it would be a little bit more trouble. Also, the more I'm looking at this, the more I'm thinking it might be a little too close to color. I think once we get some wash on there, it'll be a little easier. And also, once we do some, we're going to do some highlights on the leather, and that'll really change up the color. It is a little different. And what's unfortunate is, even if your colors, oh my goodness, there's a plane flying over my head. I don't know if you can hear that right now, but it is very loud. I'll let that guy pass. Alright. So while in real life you might have a situation where your horse's fur and the leather are very similar colors, it helps a lot to create a little bit of contrast between the two. Contrast paints, contrast. To be able to help really differentiate between the two. Oh, I can see another spot that I missed some of the fur on the ear. I don't know why around the ear is such a hard spot for me, but what we might do in a couple of I think what we're going to do is do some yellow highlights. That I think will really add some pop to it, and it'll give it. Yeah, I'm gonna do yellow. Maybe not. Who knows? We're gonna give it a try. We're gonna see how it feels. That's the nice thing about doing this, is we can sort of play around with it and see what we like the looks of and what we don't. Remember, you can always go over the paint with another paint as long as you've done thin coats. Which, let's be honest, I don't think you can get much thinner than a contrast paint. Make sure we don't have any white that we're leaving behind. Alright, so we've got the leathers done. Yeah, I'm not I'm not totally sold on it. I think we're going to definitely need to bring this up. And by that I mean add some sort of visual distinctiveness between the leather and the horse's fur, just because they are very, very similar in color. Ooh, got some white spots on the belly there. That's okay. We'll come back to that. But I am enjoying the sort of the difference in the color between the two horses. I think that's a fun sort of thing. It's got the light mane and dark fur, and then the dark fur and the light mane. Takes two models that are identical in sculpt and makes them look very different on the table. Ooh, let's go ahead and do a nice, let's do a nice ultramarine blue for the saddlebag, or the bedroll, just on the back of the horse here. Gotta break up the stuff, because these will settle if you let them. I'm going to turn this off for a sec so you don't have to listen to me shake. As you can see, there's still some slight discoloration there on the bottom. An agitator would be helpful for this one, but I don't have one right now, so I'm just going to keep on shaking. Alright, I'm finally back. So, last sort of big thing that we're going to put contrast on is going to be that this guy here. Then we're washing and beginning our detail work. But as you can see, you can really get a lot of color on a model very quickly with relative ease. I've been doing this whole thing with this monster brush. Because I like to. You can get a little bit more paint on the brush. You can. You don't need a lot of detail for contrasts. And I do enjoy a well modeled piece. So like this bag has a lot of interesting textures on it, and all of that is really being brought up by the contrast. And some models are nice like that. They'll give you a good sort of base to work with, you know, a very interesting thing to bring the details out. That is helpful. This is also why it's so important to not over prime your miniatures. You can't go too crazy when you're priming, otherwise you will just fill in all these details with primer and you won't be able to bring it out as easily. I like it. This has a much more sort of, I feel this horse to me feels more like something you'd see in the city, whereas this one is much more one that you'd see sort of out in the country. So now I have an idea to make this saddle a little bit more interesting. It's mostly dry at this point. I let it dry just, oh, it still has some, oh boy. Oh dear. See, that right there is a perfect example of why you shouldn't let your contrasts pool, because otherwise it will cause trouble. That's okay. Saddles have wear on them, so we'll just say that that's part of the character of the saddle. Do another thin coat of the brown. Because apparently I mixed it a little thin, which is okay. I think while we're waiting for that to dry, let's go ahead and hop back to our horse's fur. Now, I've noticed that this brown is very similar to the sort of color we're using here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 1-to-1 white and brown. Create a color so we can clean up those spots where we got our other colors on the initial fur color. And if I'm being honest, I would say there's probably a little bit more yellow in there. Like if we're going to try and match the color, I think a little bit of yellow would be good, but we're not trying to match, we're simply trying to cover the spots where some of the other colors got on our fur. And then once we have that, we'll go back over it with our contrast, and it should all blend nicely. The contrast is not dark enough to be able to, so like here where I got that nice thick layer of red, the contrast wouldn't be able to cover that. So what we're going to do, so I wonder, yeah, let me make sure you can see that. Yeah, there's that nice red stripe there. So we're just going to come in with our lighter color. It's a bit lighter than I wanted it, but it's going to cover, and that's what's important. Now we can go back through with our contrast. It should work out pretty well. More red than I wanted. Yeah. So let's see, we got the hip there. I got a spot on his ear. Can I see it there? Light up the ear, which is nice. Oh yeah, I got some definite spot. You know what? The inside of the leg I'm kind of okay with. I kind of like that as a color choice. What else did I get? I know I got some other spots. I'm just not seeing them right now. Ooh, to darken that up. I thought I got. Oh, let's do here. Looks like it was mostly the red. And what I've done here is I just got a little bit of water on my brush. And I'm just going back over it to kind of get some of the excess off. Oh, that was where it was. Okay, I knew it was. It seems to be mostly the red that I was a little bit more willy-nilly with. Alright, so cleaned up a couple spots. Before. Yeah, let's go ahead and go back to our original fur color. Clean up some of those. So yeah, contrasts definitely have their sort of ups and their benefits and detriments. Not being able to really like being as opaque as they are, there is a level of you got to be a little bit more careful sometimes with your colors, especially when you're dealing with the very light ones. But for instance, this color, I've wiped my other color off, and I didn't give it enough chance to dry. So this one, the reason I got it originally was because this is a great way to do skeletons, which I would love to do, because I've always been a big fan of skeletons. I do have quite a few of them in my collection. At this point, most of them are actually painted though, which is sort of nice. But yeah, this one's very nice because you can essentially hit your skeletons with your white primer, then hit it with this, then do a dry brush, and then you're done. Yeah, so that's cleaned up. The red's kind of messy. Oh. Yeah, some sort of hard to reach spots. I have to make sure I do. Alright. Since we still got a little bit more time before that saddle is done, I think we're going to switch over to doing some of the blacks on this guy. We've got, I keep forgetting to do his ears. That's okay. I still gotta do his bridle anyway, so I'll finish that afterwards. So we got a couple spots where we need black. There's hooves, which just gonna make things nice and easy. We got his eyes, which are gonna be pain, and then the insides of this. And I'm actually gonna paint that whole thing black because that will help the our metal pop a little bit. Because we're going to make the stirrups metal. Also, it's not until I'm talking about a horse that I realize how much terminology for the horse's different things I know. I didn't know that I knew all of those words. They just keep popping into my head. We're going to go ahead and for the hooves and the stirrups, we're going to go ahead and keep with our black. Oh, sorry, with our black. That's the color, yes. We're going to keep with the monster brush, just because I'm sort of used to it. It's a very versatile brush. It's also a great sort of reminder that you don't always need like the tiny no hairs brush to get some fine detail. As long as your bristles make a nice point, then you are good to go. I think I need to come back with the fur and bring the fur far enough down. How big are hooves? I can tell you all these terms for a saddle, but I couldn't tell you how big a hoof is. That's okay. I still got some of the spots that I need to clean up with the fur color anyway. So I basically just need to come down and bring the fur down to the hoof. Be very careful here, because we're right on the edges of some areas that would be kind of a pain to redo. Tell that I left this brush and my paint pot for just a little too long because the tip of it is sort of bent over, which is not great. Do the bottoms. Again, it's something that may not be seen, but just to make sure that you're not leaving things partially done. It's always sort of satisfying to do that. Alright. I wonder, let's try this. We're gonna clean up the fur in a couple spots, and then we're gonna hit the whole thing of the fur with some wash and see what that does. See if that makes me... Yeah, because I think, you know what it is? I think the bridle just needs to be a slightly different color. I think that's where I'm running into trouble. I'm not digging exactly how that's turning out. So again, go back to our fur color because I keep forgetting bits. Also, I have to say I've really been enjoying how much you guys have been watching these videos. I'm glad to see that you're getting something out of them. Nothing else, you enjoy the dulcet sounds of my tones as I ramble on working on some painting. Yeah, and like I said, next week I'm going to have some links for this set, because we'll be diving into some of the goblins. And really what we're looking at for next week is kind of going over how to paint a grouping of models. Because kind of your approach to it is a little bit different than you do sort of an individual model, or like what I like to call a hero model. Because you just kind of end up using the colors a little bit differently. Your distribution is a little different. All right. Yeah, let's go ahead and now I gotta let it dry. I'm gonna go over the bridle with a slightly darker. Oh, dang it. Sorry, I pulled it away. So you can kind of see, so this right here is a great example of, you can see a little bit of the white peeking out, and I really don't like that because I think it breaks the illusion somewhat if between two colors you can see that sort of white gap. So we're going to go ahead and pop in here with a little bit of the dark, clean that right up. Alright, so actually what I'm going to do, because I did notice that we are very close to ending our time, one final step that I'm going to do, because this guy actually right now is about tabletop ready. I want to do a couple more little detail things here and there to really clean it up, but the thing that I really want to do, that I think is kind of the final step, is there are some medals on him. He has, on his bridle, he has some points here, and the stirrups, those guys there. I think once we get... Oh, this is still open. Once we get some paint on those, then I can officially declare this guy done enough, and then we can switch to the other painting project. For this one, I am going to go ahead and go to my regiment brush, just to make it a little easier. Just a little dollop of our plate metal. Oh, gotta find my focal point. And it's just gonna be kind of a quick little spot. I'm gonna do the strips. So a little pop of metal. Yeah, this joint I'm definitely gonna have to, could use a little bit more on a couple spots, but again, for tabletop it's looking pretty good. This guy here. Now, if you wanted, if you had other metals, if you had the inclination. You could make the metal here on his head a slightly different color to add a level of sort of visual interest. I wouldn't maybe necessarily do a gold on this guy just because he does have such a gold kind of colored fur. But you could definitely play around with some different sort of metal colors there. Add a little visual interest. And they could be made of other materials too. Like these don't necessarily have to be metal. You could make them sort of a much brighter color. Well, there we go. Actually, honestly, that guy's looking pretty good. There's a couple spots that I'm gonna probably clean up, but for the purposes of introducing you guys to contrast paints, I feel like that's a great sort of introduction. Let me clean up the old brush and then change our focus so I can get a little closer on him. I think also these ones rather, are a great example of, with just a little bit of a change in your color palette, you can really change the look of the model. Oh, he does need some black on his eyes, but again, for now it'll be okay. So yeah, you've got this guy that is a much more sort of urban, you know, like if you were in say Waterdeep or one of those kind of bigger, oh goodness, I think Thalenial? No, that's a different fantasy city. Silvery Moon. Whereas if you were out sort of on the wilderness, you might be expected to see this horse. And again, what's a great example about these guys is these are the exact same model, with the exception of this one. It has its legs crossed for some reason. It was in the packaging that way. But just with a little bit of change in color, you can make two very distinct, very different looking miniatures. So, this was another delightful painting day. I really enjoyed painting with you guys. Like I said, next week we're going to be starting into our batch painting, which I'm very excited for. I will also, again, have the link to this guy here, our Epic Encounters Goblin Village, which includes this delightful little snail, as well as a variety of other things. And I couldn't help myself. I've gotta wash the saddle. I know that I've definitely said that there does reach a point in every model's life where you just gotta kind of, you know, cut the cord and say that you've done the best you could, and you've gotta just let them go. But oh yeah, I just really enjoy the satisfaction of a good wash. I'm already letting the the wash pool in places I shouldn't. It darkens up the lines. It's a funny thing that it's a dark wash. That's what it's meant to do. I have been noticing there's a lot of. I'm actually really excited for doing these little frog guys because they're hard to see now, but each of them has a frog in their hand, a frog on their head, and then what essentially amounts to a frog on their chest as well. So they're going to be filled with color, and I'm very excited to get to be a little bit more colorful with my painting. I feel like it's been the colors that I've done so far have been very appropriate and very boring. So I'm gonna dive into some interesting sort of bright colors, which I'm very excited for. Also, I think that helped a lot. Darkened up that saddle, added a level of visual interest to it. Yeah, that's nice. That's a good finishing touch. And if you wanted, you could definitely dry brush the fur. I think that would also add a lot of pop to the fur. I'm not going to for this particular one because One of the things that's very nice about contrast paints is you don't have to dry brush them afterwards. They're pretty visually interesting as it is. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for joining me on another episode of the Painting Show. I've really been it's been very flattering, your guys' support so far. We're going to be starting into doing some goblins next week, which is very, very exciting. Next week is also our the Zombie Ogre Paint Night. There are still kits available for that. If you go to Facebook, the Zulus Facebook, there is a event information there. But until then, have fun, enjoy your painting, stay safe out there, and I will see you next week. Bye.